Commander, let's light the sky. Training sharper drone pilots, learning how to fly. Mission ready mindset, safety leading every plan. Skills that build confidence from takeoff through the scan. Tune in at Sky Commander, come join the crew today. Learning smart, fly with purpose, level up your way. We see more, no sooner, that's the edge we're here to spread. See above, go beyond, get ahead.
Okay, let's get started. You know, there is this almost universal experience we all have when we first get our hands on a camera or a drone.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You are out in the city, the sun finally goes down, and you look at the skyline. It is just absolutely mesmerizing.
It really is.
The lights are glowing, the mood is incredible, and it feels cinematic. It feels expensive and just, dripping with atmosphere. So you hit record.
Right. You think you're capturing magic.
Exactly. You fly the drone, you capture this sweeping shot, and for about 10 minutes, you feel like an absolute hero, but then you get home.
And reality sets in.
Yeah. You pull that footage up on a real monitor the next day, and instead of that crisp, gorgeous city, you are staring at a muddy, grainy, blotchy mess.
It's just devastating.
It really is. The shadows are crawling with ugly, shifting colors.
Yeah.
The highlights from the street lamps are completely blown out.
Right, the crisp edges of the buildings are just gone.
Completely gone. And you sit there wondering, why does the night lie to us?
It is a phenomenal question because the betrayal feels so personal. Yeah. The scene promises you one thing emotionally. I mean, it gives you all this mood and drama, but it delivers something completely different technically.
Because the camera doesn't see what we see.
Exactly. The camera simply does not experience the night the way human biology does.
Well, today we are going to figure out why. We are looking at a huge stack of sources for this deep dive. We've got aviation manuals, camera engineering documents, and the actual regulatory codes.
It is a lot of material to get through.
It is, but our mission is to figure out exactly why low light isn't just a simple matter of changing your camera settings.
Right.
We are going to explore how operating in the dark is fundamentally a physics problem, a deeply ingrained psychological trap, and, honestly, a massive legal minefield.
Yeah, we're really unpacking the intersection of image quality, aviation law, and human overconfidence.
Okay, let's unpack this, because where do we even begin when the sun goes down?
Wow.
Because my instinct is always just to say, well, there's less light, so the camera has to work harder.
Right, and that makes intuitive sense. But to understand the psychology and the law, we first have to understand the literal microscopic physics of what happens when the lights go out.
Okay, the physics.
Because the root of all these problems starts with a fundamental change in the information your camera is receiving. Saying less light is actually the wrong way to think about it.
Wait, really? How should I be thinking about it?
Low light is less information. A great way to visualize exposure is to think of it as a photon budget.
A photon budget, okay.
Yeah, imagine catching raindrops in a bucket.
So the bucket is the camera sensor, and the raindrops are the actual photons of light hitting it.
Precisely. In bright daylight, it is pouring rain. It is a torrential downpour of photons.
Right.
Even if you only open your bucket for a fraction of a second, which is your shutter speed.
Right.
Or if you only open the lid a tiny bit, which is your aperture, you are still going to collect a massive amount of water.
Because it's pouring.
Exactly.
Okay.
You have a huge signal. Your camera has all the physical information it needs to build a crisp, colorful, accurate image.
Because millions of photons are hitting every single pixel well on that sensor.
Right. But at night, the storm is over.
Yeah.
It is barely drizzling. At night, you open that same bucket for the exact same amount of time, and you catch almost nothing. The sensor is literally starved for photons.
And this is where we have to talk about what noise actually is, right?
Yeah. People tend to think of noise as just grain, or an ugly texture that magically appears because the camera is cheap or broken.
That's definitely what I used to think.
But physically, noise is uncertainty made visible.
Uncertainty made visible. That is such a wild concept.
It really is.
So it's not the camera inventing texture, it's the camera guessing because it doesn't have enough data.
Exactly. When the sensor is starved of photons, it doesn't just record pure black. It tries to measure a signal that is incredibly weak.
Okay.
And because light itself arrives in discrete, individual packets photons when you have very few of them, the randomness of how they arrive becomes a huge part of the measurement.
So it's like a statistical error.
Right. It's a concept called photon shot noise. Think of it like conducting a political poll.
Oh, I like this analogy.
If you ask 10 million people who they are voting for. You get a highly accurate picture of the population. That is your daylight exposure.
Right, massive sample size.
But if you only ask 10 people, the random chance of who you happen to pick wildly skews the data. That is your low light exposure.
Oh, wow. So the randomness scales with the lack of data.
Precisely.
So when you have lots of light, the noise is just a tiny invisible fraction of the picture.
Yeah, it's there, but you can't see it.
But when you have very little light, that random scatter of photons becomes a massive percentage of what the sensor is actually recording.
And this leads directly into the biggest misunderstanding in digital photography and drone flying.
Which is?
The ISO setting.
Oh, man. ISO.
Yeah, so many people think of ISO as a night mode or a magical setting that somehow forces the camera to suck in more light.
I'll completely admit, for years I thought ISO stood for how sensitive the sensor was.
Like the old film days.
Exactly, like buying different speeds of film back in the day. You put in ISO 800 film, it's physically more sensitive than ISO 100 film. Doesn't the digital sensor do the exact same thing?
It actually doesn't. And this is a crucial engineering distinction in the sources.
Okay, lay it on me.
ISO stands for the International Organization for Standardization. But on a digital sensor, the base sensitivity of the silicon doesn't change.
Wait, it doesn't change at all?
Not at all. The pixel well catches exactly the same number of photons, whether you at ISO 100 or ISO 6400.
So what is it actually doing then?
ISO is not extra light, it is a volume knob.
A volume knob, so it's just an amplifier.
It's an electrical amplifier.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a weak signal, like someone whispering from across a crowded, noisy room, turning up the volume knob on a microphone doesn't make their voice clearer.
Right, just makes everything louder.
It makes the whisper louder, but it also amplifies all the background static, the hiss of the air conditioner, the murmur of the crowd.
Ah, I see.
When you raise the ISO on a digital camera, you are taking the weak electrical signal generated by those few photons and amplifying it.
So you are boosting the image information, but you are equally boosting that photon shot noise we just talked about.
Exactly.
Oh, wait, let me play devil's advocate here. If the image gets brighter on my controller screen when I crank the ISO, I feel like I've solved the problem.
Sure, it looks better in the moment.
Right. I mean, bright is bright. If I can suddenly see the building I'm trying to film, why does it matter if the signal is amplified?
Well, there is a massive fundamental difference between a bright image and a clean image.
Okay.
Just because you made the footage bright enough to see on your tiny controller screen does not mean you captured a trustworthy file.
Because the degradation is still there.
The degradation happens mathematically, and the shadows are always the first casualties.
Why do the shadows die first, though? If I'm turning up the overall volume of the image, shouldn't everything degrade equally?
It comes down to the signal-to-noise ratio.
Okay, the signal-to-noise ratio.
Think about the highlights. Say, the street lamps or the glowing windows. They actually received a decent number of photons.
So they have a strong signal.
Right. Their signal is strong, so when you amplify them, they look okay. But the shadows receive the absolute least amount of light in the entire scene.
They got barely any raindrops in the bucket.
Exactly. They have the weakest signal of all. So when you multiply that weak signal with a high ISO, you're mostly just multiplying the noise.
Oh, wow.
The camera tries to stretch that tiny bit of shadow detail across a visible spectrum, and suddenly you see the mess.
And it is a very specific kind of mess. When you look at the technical breakdown in the documents of what happens to that image, there are 3 distinct types of noise that ruin your footage.
Yeah, it's not just one thing.
I used to think grain was just grain, but the sources make it clear it's much more destructive than that.
The first type is luminoise.
Luminoise.
This is brightness grain. It is monochromatic, just black and white speckles.
Okay, that doesn't sound too bad.
Honestly, it isn't. Sometimes it can almost look like vintage film grain. Human vision can actually tolerate a fair amount of luminoise if it is fine enough.
Because it doesn't destroy the underlying structure of the image, right?
Exactly. But then you get into the second type, which is the absolute killer.
It's a chromanoise.
Chromanoise. It shows up as ugly, blotchy patches of false color.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that.
You will see these weird magenta, neon green, and purple speckles clumping together in areas that should be dark, neutral shadows.
It's so distracting.
Our human eyes instinctively hate false color. It immediately makes the footage look cheap, electronic, and just fundamentally broken.
And if you're shooting video instead of just taking still photos, you trigger the third type.
Yeah, temporal noise.
Temporal noise.
Temporal noise is the one that really destroys a moving shot. It is noise that crawls and dances from frame to frame.
Oh, like when the shadows look like they are vibrating?
Exactly. In a still photo, you might just see a static pattern of grain. But in a video playing at 24 or 30 frames per second, that grain is constantly shifting.
It makes the shadows look like a boiling swarm of pixels.
A boiling swarm is the perfect way to describe it. And from a technical standpoint, this absolutely destroys video compression.
Wait, how so? Because the file size gets bigger.
Well, yes, but it's more insidious than that. Video compression algorithms work by looking for parts of the frame that stay the same over time.
Like a dark sky or a solid wall.
Right, and they save space by not redrawing those pixels every single frame.
Oh, that makes sense.
But if temporal noise is constantly boiling and shifting the colors of those pixels, the compression algorithm panics.
It thinks the whole scene is moving.
It thinks everything is moving, so it dedicates all its processing power to encoding the noise, starving the actual details of the image.
Wow.
The final file ends up looking blocky, banded, and smeared.
That perfectly sets up this incredible example from the camera engineering playbooks regarding dark asphalt.
Oh, the asphalt example is so good.
Imagine you're flying a drone over a commercial parking lot or a recently paved road. In daylight, you see everything.
Right, the cracks, the tiny rocks in the aggregate, the texture of the pavement.
But at night, under a weak streetlight, if you crank the ISO to 3200 to make that asphalt bright, you do not magically get the texture back.
No, the noise takes over.
But then, the camera tries to save you with its internal noise reduction.
And that save is often what finally ruins the shot completely.
Really?
Yeah. The camera's internal processor looks at that boiling chroma noise and knows it looks terrible. So it applies spatial and temporal smoothing algorithms to try to hide it.
So it's trying to clean it up for you.
It basically blurs adjacent pixels together to average out the false colors.
But the algorithm is blind, right?
Exactly. It can't tell the difference between random noise and
Yeah.
actual fine physical detail, like the cracks in the asphalt.
So it smooths away everything.
Everything. The cracks, the grit, the physical reality of the surface gets wiped out in the process of deleting the noise.
What are you left with then?
What you are left with is a flat, plasticky, watercolor painting of a parking lot.
That's awful.
It is brighter, yes, but it contains significantly less true visual information than it did before you boosted the ISO.
Okay, so the sensor is starved for information. Raising the ISO just amplifies the garbage, and the camera's attempt to hide the garbage deletes the actual detail.
What's the summary? Yeah.
If the camera has to make all these compromises, it leads directly into what the operational manuals call the night flying triangle.
The night flying triangle. It's a brutal balancing act.
You are constantly juggling 3 enemies at the same time.
Wow.
Weak signal, motion, and ugly light.
Right.
And the absolute trap here is that fixing one of these problems immediately feeds another.
It is an endless game of whack-a-mole.
Let's look at the first battle, shutter speed versus ISO.
Okay.
We established that a weak signal pushes you to use a high ISO, which ruins your image with noise.
Correct.
So the logical workaround for a lot of pilots is to just slow down the shutter speed.
Just leave the bucket open longer.
Right. Keep that photon bucket open longer to catch more light naturally so you don't have to turn up the volume knob. That feels like the right instinct.
It does. And there's a standard rule in video production that plays into this, right? The 180-degree shutter rule.
Yeah, generally, to get natural-looking motion in video, you want your shutter speed to be roughly double your frame rate.
Exactly. So if you are shooting cinematic footage at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be roughly 150th of a second.
And if you are shooting 60 frames per second for slow motion, you want 1120th of a second.
This gives you a very natural amount of motion blur that mimics how the human eye perceives reality.
But at night, pilots panic.
They absolutely panic.
They look at the dark screen. They know cranking the ISO will introduce that boiling chroma noise, so they start dragging the shutter.
They drop it to 130th, 115th, or even slower if the drone allows it.
And that is when they invite the second enemy, motion.
Right. Because when you slow the shutter down, you are giving any movement more time to smear across the sensor while the bucket is open.
Now, if you are shooting a static skyline from a heavy, locked-off tripod on the ground, a slow shutter is a brilliant strategy.
It's perfect. The city isn't moving, the camera isn't moving, so nothing blurs.
But a drone is fundamentally a moving platform.
Always moving. Even in a perfectly still hover, it's constantly making micro adjustments.
You have the translation of the aircraft moving through space.
You have the gimbal motors making microscopic twitches to maintain stabilization.
You have wind buffering the frame.
And you have the pilot's own yaw inputs on the sticks.
So the moment the drone moves, or the moment a car drives through the frame on the ground below, that slow shutter turns all of it into an unreadable, streaky smear.
It makes me think of trying to drink a bowl of hot soup on a roller coaster.
Oh, I love that analogy from the sources.
Right. If you slow down the ride so you don't spill the soup, which is slowing down your shutter, the ride loses all its thrill and energy.
You get this sluggish, blurry experience.
But if you speed up the ride to keep the thrill, using a fast shutter to freeze the motion, you get burned by the hot soup.
Which is the high ISO noise.
Exactly. You cannot have a fast, dynamic flight path in the dark without accepting the noise.
That analogy gets right to the heart of the pilot's dilemma. You are constantly choosing which defect you can live with.
Always.
If you are executing a sweeping orbit around a building or tracking a moving vehicle, blur is almost always the more destructive force.
Oh, absolutely. A grainy high ISO image can still be readable. It might look a little gritty, but the information is there.
But a smeared, blurry image is completely worthless.
You cannot rescue blur in post-production. You can't unsmear a pixel.
So professional operators will almost always take the ISO hit and deal with the noise in order to protect the motion integrity of the shot.
That is the professional trade-off.
Okay, so we are battling ISO noise and shutter blur. That's two sides of the triangle. But what about the third side?
Ugly light.
Ugly light is a huge problem. The manuals dive deep into color temperature, and it made me realize how much we take our own biology for granted.
If we step back and look at human biology, our brains are incredibly sophisticated, real-time color interpretation machines.
They really are.
If you walk into a living room where there is a bluish twilight coming through the window and a warm orange incandescent lamp turned on in the corner, your brain instantly normalizes the scene.
You know, a white piece of paper sitting on the coffee table is white regardless of which light is hitting it.
Right. Your brain auto-corrects the color temperature on the fly.
But cameras don't have brains.
No, they don't. They only record exactly the color temperature of the photons hitting the sensor, measured in Kelvin.
And this becomes an absolute nightmare at night because of urban light pollution.
It is chaos. You almost never have one clean, continuous source of light.
You have a clashing mix.
You've got the cool blue twilight lingering in the sky at 10,000 Kelvin. You've got the heavy, muddy orange glow of older sodium vapor street lamps at 2,000 Kelvin.
You've got the harsh, icy blue of modern LED parking lot lights.
And greenish fluorescent spill coming out of a warehouse garage, and warm tungsten light glowing from residential windows.
And the camera's auto-white balance feature is basically just guessing, right? It looks at all that and tries to find an average.
Auto-white balance algorithms generally operate on what's called the gray world assumption.
The gray world assumption.
They assume that if you average all the colors in a scene together, it should equal a neutral gray.
Okay.
But in a mixed lighting night scene, that assumption completely falls apart. The camera either averages everything into a muddy mess, or worse, it hunts back and forth as the drone moves and different lights enter the frame.
The playbooks outline a scenario called the parking lot stress test, and it perfectly illustrates why auto-white balance is a disaster at night.
It is an absolute torture test for the sensor.
Walk me through exactly what happens when you fly over a standard commercial strip mall at 9:00 p.m.
Imagine the scene. You have bright, cool overhead LED poles casting intensely blue pools of light on the ground.
Okay.
You have warm amber spill coming from the giant glass storefronts of the shops.
Right.
You have the dark, noise-prone asphalt soaking up everything. And you have dozens of parked cars with highly reflective glass and metallic paint bouncing all these conflicting colors back up into the drone's lens.
So what does the auto-white balance do?
It gets pulled in 5 different directions at once.
Oh, no.
If the algorithm decides to neutralize the warm orange storefront to make it look white, it has to push the entire image toward the blue spectrum.
Suddenly, the LED parking lot lights turn aggressively, clinically blue.
Exactly, making the scene look like a sci-fi hospital.
But as the drone pans and the storefront leaves the frame, the camera sees all that blue LED light and panics.
Right, so it pushes the whole image toward orange to compensate.
Now the asphalt looks brown and the shadows turn muddy.
And meanwhile, those shadows are already crawling with magenta and green chroma noise from the high ISO.
It's a complete failure of the image.
This is exactly why the operational manuals insist that professionals never let the camera decide the color at night.
They lock in a custom white balance manually.
Always. They look at the scene, decide which light source is the most dominant or the most important for the narrative of the shot, and they dial in a specific Kelvin number to lock the white balance to that source.
So they accept that other lights in the scene will look overly warm or overly cool?
Yes, because they choose absolute consistency over the camera's wild, automated guessing game.
Okay, so the sensor is starving for photons. We are choosing between noise and blur, and the colors are a clashing, chaotic mess.
It's a lot to manage.
It really is. If the actual image sensor is struggling this much with a lack of information, what is happening to the camera's brain?
That is the next big hurdle.
Specifically, how does it even know what to focus on if it can barely see the scene?
This brings us to one of the most chilling warnings in the source material.
Which is?
The little green autofocus confirmation box on your controller screen can and will lie to you.
This legitimately stressed me out when I read it.
Oh, it's terrifying.
You see the green box, you hear the little beep, you think, great, the shot is sharp, let's execute the maneuver.
Right.
But the manuals explain the mechanical reality of why that box is a liar in low light.
To understand the lie, you have to understand the mechanics of autofocus. Most modern drone cameras use contrast detection, and some use phase detection systems.
Okay.
Both of these systems rely on finding sharp transitions between light and dark to determine where a physical edge is located.
Makes sense.
In broad daylight, a dark brick chimney against a bright blue sky provides massive contrast. The camera processor sees that sharp line, calculates the distance, and snaps right to it.
But in low light, the contrast collapses.
Exactly. Everything becomes shades of gray and black.
You have a dark building against a dark night sky, or a subject wearing dark clothing walking across a dim parking lot.
The autofocus system looks at that area and sees no clean edges. It just sees a mushy, low-contrast soup.
Which is further degraded by the noise we talked about.
Yes. So the lens starts hunting. It racks focus back and forth, trying to find any transition that it can confidently lock onto.
And this is where point lights become the ultimate villain.
Oh, they are the worst.
The manuals warn that bright spot lighting, like neon signs, street lamps, or the headlights of a car, will completely hijack the autofocus system.
Think about it from the computer's perspective. A bright, blazing street lamp against a pitch-black background is the ultimate high-contrast edge.
Right.
If you were trying to film a subtle architectural detail on a dark building, but there is a bright security light just to the left of your focus point, the camera's brain will abandon the building entirely and lock onto the light.
Because it is programmed to grab the brightest, highest contrast element in its zone, not the most narratively useful thing.
And because drone sensors are relatively small compared to massive cinema cameras, they have a tighter margin for error. The focus shifts incredibly fast.
So if the camera gives me the green box, but it has actually bypassed my subject and locked onto a street lamp 100 yards behind it, why didn't I notice that while I'm flying? I have a screen right in my hands. I should be able to see that the building is blurry.
This introduces a human factors concept that is absolutely vital to understand. The controller screen you are holding in your hands is what the aviation psychologists would call an emotional fraud.
An emotional fraud.
Or a confidence machine.
A confidence machine. That is such a striking phrase.
We have to evaluate your physiological state as a pilot standing out in the dark.
Okay.
Sun has gone down. You are standing in a dim field or an alleyway. Biologically, your pupils are wide open, fully dilated to let in as much ambient light as possible so you can see your surroundings.
Right.
Now, you are staring down at a brightly backlit controller screen or a tablet. That screen is pumping a highly compressed, pre-processed, bright preview image directly into your dilated eyes.
And the scene around you feels exciting, dramatic, and full of adrenaline.
And the screen is physically small. It's maybe 6 or 8 inches across.
That is the critical flaw, isn't it?
It is. At that size, minor focus misses are completely invisible to the human eye. Heavy compression artifacts are hidden.
And the crawling temporal noise in the shadows.
It's crushed down so small that you simply don't register it.
Wow.
The preview image is actively masking the technical failures of the shot, while your brain is high on the thrill of a dramatic night flight.
You look at that bright, punchy little screen and think, this looks incredible.
Exactly. The training materials outline a scenario called the real estate twilight trap.
Oh, let's walk through this one. It happens to commercial pilots every single day.
From start to finish, it's a perfect storm.
You are hired to shoot a luxury home at dusk. To your human eye, standing in the driveway, the house looks spectacular.
The interior lights are glowing this warm, welcoming amber.
The sky above the roofline is a deep, rich, moody blue.
The landscape lighting is casting elegant little pools on the bushes. It feels incredibly expensive and premium.
Emotionally, it is a peak visual experience. Your brain is loving the contrast and the mood.
But the camera doesn't have emotions.
No, it doesn't. The camera is experiencing the nightmare of the night flying triangle.
Right. The walls of the house have no contrast against a twilight, so the autofocus drifts.
The interior windows are so overwhelmingly bright compared to the brick that they completely blow out the sensor, destroying all the highlight data.
The landscaping is buried in pitch black shadow.
And because the pilot left it on auto ISO, those shadows are crawling with magenta and green chroma noise.
But the pilot, looking at their bright little confidence machine of a screen, just feels the vibe.
They push the sticks and fly these aggressive, sweeping, fast orbits around the property because it feels dynamic and cool.
And what happens the next morning when they sit down to edit?
They open the file on a 27-inch color-calibrated studio monitor, and reality hits them.
It is a disaster.
A total disaster. The aggressive orbit they flew required a fast shutter speed to freeze the motion, but they were using a slow shutter to let in light, so the entire house is smeared with motion blur.
The autofocus grabbed the reflection of a street lamp on a window instead of the actual brick facade, so the structure is soft.
The shadows in the yard are a muddy mess of false color, and when they try to brighten them, the image falls apart.
It is a total failure.
That is the emotional fraud in action.
The disconnect between what the pilot feels in the field, aided by the lie of the small screen, and what the camera actually records onto the micro SD card, is the most dangerous hazard in night operations.
Which leads us into the philosophical core of this entire deep dive, the cinematic trap.
The cinematic trap.
There is a quote from the operational playbooks that I think every pilot and photographer should tape to their monitor. Low light gives you a free emotional upgrade. It does not give you a free technical upgrade.
It really is the definitive thesis statement for night flying.
Darkness adds mood for free. It gives you atmosphere. It gives you drama. It makes things feel important.
But simultaneously, it is actively degrading your technical capability.
Right. The cinematic trap is when an operator allows the emotional upgrade of the mood to convince them that the technical degradation doesn't matter.
And to combat this trap, the playbooks draw a brilliant, hard line between two types of footage.
Pleasing footage and reliable footage.
This distinction is what separates the hobbyists from the professionals.
So what is pleasing footage?
Pleasing footage is exactly what it sounds like. It feels good. It's moody, it's atmospheric, it looks cool when it's compressed on a tiny phone screen while someone is scrolling through social media.
Right, but reliable footage is fundamentally different.
Reliable footage accurately preserves visual information. It holds up to intense scrutiny.
If you zoom in on a 4K monitor, the edges are sharp.
The colors represent physical reality. The shadows aren't hiding structural defects.
So if you are shooting a music video, maybe you just need pleasing footage. The vibe is the product.
Sure, absolutely.
But if you are executing a commercial roof inspection, asset documentation, search and rescue, or delivering premium architectural work, pleasing is not enough. It must be reliable.
And to help pilots figure out which one they are actually capturing, the manuals break night footage down into a framework called the 3 buckets of judgment.
It is a fantastic mental model. Let's break down the buckets. The first is bucket 1, valuable footage.
Valuable footage earns its place.
It does something that a daytime shot simply cannot do. It adds necessary context that only exists in the dark.
For example, if you are shooting an outdoor concert, the stage lights, the lasers, and the glow of the crowd only exist at night. The darkness is the story.
Or if you are doing an industrial shoot at an oil refinery, the operational lighting and the flare stacks tell a story about its 2047 scale and activity.
Exactly. The low light is actively helping the mission. It is intentional and necessary.
Then you move into bucket 2, risky footage.
This is where the margin of error is rapidly shrinking.
The shot might still be valuable, but the physical cost to capture it is getting dangerously high.
You notice the autofocus is hunting. You are having to crank the ISO past your comfort zone.
The flight route you planned feels a little too complex for how dark the background is getting.
And the professional move here isn't necessarily to abort the flight, but to redesign the shot on the fly.
Precisely. If you identify that you are in the risky bucket, you adapt.
You fly a slower, more deliberate route to reduce motion blur.
You widen the framing so slight focus misses are less apparent.
You simplify the background to give the camera better contrast.
You actively strip away the complexity until the shot moves back into the valuable bucket, or you realize the physics won't allow it and it can't be saved.
Which leads to bucket 3, imagined footage.
Oh, this bucket is the absolute worst place to be.
It is. This is where the pilot is actively, mentally filling in the gaps that the camera has already missed.
We have all been guilty of this.
Oh, completely. You look at the controller screen and you start bargaining with reality.
You say things to yourself like, well, the shadows are completely crushed to black, but the mood is incredible.
Or, the focus is a little soft on the main building, but we can just run a sharpening filter on it in post-production.
Or the absolute classic, it will look fine when people watch it on their phones.
Yes, we'll fix it in post. The ultimate battle cry of the imagined footage bucket.
It really is.
If you have to invent a story or formulate an excuse to defend why the shot is acceptable before the drone has even landed, it is bad footage.
You are evaluating the scene based on a fantasy of what you hope your editing software can achieve rather than the reality of the weak, noisy data actually being recorded to the sensor.
Exactly.
I want to push back on this a little bit, though.
Okay, go for it.
Because we hear the word cinematic thrown around constantly. Isn't cinematic exactly what high-end clients are paying for? They want the moody, dramatic, cinematic look. Why is cinematic treated as such a dangerous, almost dirty word in these operational manuals?
That is a crucial distinction to make. The problem isn't the aesthetic of actual cinema. The problem is the lazy amateur application of the word. Pilots often hear cinematic, and they immediately equate it to darker is better, slower is better, heavy contrast is better.
Right.
But if you look at true cinematic footage, the kind you see in a major Hollywood motion picture, it is none of those things by accident. True cinematic footage is fiercely intentional.
Right. When they shoot a dark alleyway scene in a movie, they don't just turn off the lights and crank the camera's ISO.
Exactly. They blast that alleyway with massive controlled lighting rigs.
They bathe it in light to give the camera a massive photon budget, ensuring a perfectly clean, low-noise negative.
Then they carefully darken and grade the footage in post-production.
The shadows are dark, yes, but they are clean and noise-free.
The motion might be slow, but the focus is perfectly sharp and readable. The lighting color temperatures are balanced on purpose.
So it's the difference between accidental darkness and controlled lighting.
When a drone operator uses cinematic as a blanket excuse for underexposed, blurry, noisy hunting footage, they are hijacking a professional term to mask an amateur mistake.
Wow.
Redefining true cinematic footage means demanding that the shot be intentional, readable, controlled, and trustworthy.
If the darkness is hiding your mistakes rather than highlighting your subject, you aren't being cinematic. You are just flying in the dark and hoping for the best.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is. And this emotional bias, this cinematic trap, doesn't just ruin the final video file.
No. The aviation manuals make a chilling pivot here.
They argue that this emotional trap actively endangers the physical flight of the aircraft because bad cinematic judgment almost always predicts bad safety judgment.
If you are lying to yourself about the technical quality of the image on the screen, you're probably lying to yourself about how safely you are navigating the airspace.
Which means we need to step out of the camera's physics and into the cold, hard reality of aviation law and human biology.
Let's talk about visual line of sight, or VLOS, in the dark.
How do regulators actually view night flying? Because we are looking at the rulebooks from both the United States Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, and Transport Canada.
And they have some fascinating and deeply consequential differences in how they legally define the dark.
If we dive into the regulatory frameworks, the first massive difference is how they handle the transitional period of twilight, the minutes just after sunset or just before sunrise.
The manuals call this the twilight trap.
Let's unpack the Canadian rules first. In Canada, under the Canadian Aviation Regulations, or CARS, civil twilight is legally treated as daylight.
Right. Under the CARS, night is legally defined as the period of time beginning at the end of evening civil twilight and ending at the start of morning civil twilight.
So you could be flying 20 minutes after the sun has dropped below the horizon. The sky is getting quite dark, the streetlights are on, your camera is struggling with noise, but legally, on paper, you are operating in standard daylight conditions.
But in the United States, under FAA Part 107, civil twilight is not a free pass. It is separately and strictly regulated.
This is exactly the kind of nuance that catches cross-border commercial pilots off guard.
The sky looks physically identical in Toronto as it does in Chicago at 15 minutes past sunset. But the legal requirements are completely different.
Under Part 107, if you are flying during evening civil twilight, which is the 30 minutes right after sunset, you are already required to have specialized anti-collision lighting active on the drone.
And the philosophies behind the broader night rules differ fundamentally. The U.S. rules are highly prescriptive.
Prescriptive meaning they give you very specific, hard mathematical numbers you have to hit to be legal.
Exactly. Under the FAA's Part 107, if you are flying at night or during civil twilight, you must have an anti-collision light that is visible for at least 3 statute miles, and it must flash at a rate sufficient to avoid a collision.
Furthermore, you must maintain a minimum flight visibility of 3 statute miles from your control station, and you have to maintain strict cloud clearances. You must keep the drone 500 feet below and 2,000 feet horizontally from any clouds. The FAA gives you the exact math.
Whereas the Canadian rules for standard visual line of sight are much more functional.
Functional is the perfect word. Transport Canada doesn't give you a blanket 3 statute mile visibility rule for standard, small VLOS operations.
Instead, the Canadian rule states that the aircraft must have position lights sufficient to make it visible. And crucially, the weather and visibility conditions must permit the pilot to conduct the entire flight in visual line of sight.
So it's not about checking off a magic number. It's about a practical, operational reality. Can you actually see and control the aircraft safely for the whole mission?
And the aviation playbooks point out that this is not a legal loophole. It is a responsibility trap.
Because if the rule is functional, your personal judgment has to be absolutely flawless.
If you crash a drone in Canada during twilight because you lost sight of it against a dark tree line, you cannot point to the clock and say, well, the sun only set 15 minutes ago. It was technically daylight.
The regulator will simply say, you failed to maintain conditions that permitted the entire flight in visual line of sight. You are at fault.
Which demands that we define what visual line of sight actually means at night.
I think a lot of people assume VLS just means, can I see the blinking strobe light in the sky?
But the manuals are brutal about this.
Yeah.
Seeing a light is not the same as having visual line of sight.
If you see a pair of headlights 5 miles away on a dark, flat highway, you know a vehicle is there.
Right?
But you don't know if it's a small sedan or a massive semi-truck. You don't know exactly which lane it's in, and you have almost no idea how fast it's closing in on you.
That analogy perfectly captures the biological human factors at play here.
The official Aeronautical Information Manual explicitly warns pilots about how human physiology fails in the dark.
We have to talk about rods and cones. Your eyes have 2 types of photoreceptors.
Cones handle color and sharp detail, and they work best in bright light.
Rods handle black and white, and they are much more sensitive to low light.
But the rods and cones aren't distributed evenly in the eye, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The center of your vision, the foveal, is packed entirely with cones. There are almost no rods in the direct center of your eye.
So when you look directly at something in the dark, you are using the part of your eye that is least equipped to see it.
This creates a literal night blind spot in the center of your vision.
So if you stare directly at the drone in the dark, it might actually disappear from your vision.
Yes. To see a faint object at night, aviation physiology teaches pilots to look slightly off-center, about 5 to 10 degrees away from the object, to let the rods in your peripheral vision pick up the light.
But because the rods can't see sharp detail, your depth perception completely collapses.
You can spot a flashing strobe light very easily against a black sky. But human eyes are terrible at judging the range of that light without ambient reference points like trees or buildings.
So you see the drone's strobe, but your brain cannot mathematically calculate if it's 100 feet away and small or 400 feet away and large.
Precisely. And the aircraft's orientation becomes highly ambiguous. Is the drone pointing away from me or is it moving sideways?
If the lights are just a cluster of LEDs, it is incredibly difficult to tell.
Furthermore, there is a visual illusion called autokinesis.
Oh, this one is wild.
If you stare at a single stationary point of light in a dark sky for more than a few seconds, your brain gets fatigued, and the light will actually appear to start moving on its own.
That is terrifying. Your own brain invents movement that isn't happening.
And if you are flying in an urban environment, you have the added nightmare of background camouflage.
Background city lights actively hide the drone. The required anti-collision strobe might just blend into a flashing neon sign, an airplane in the distance, or the traffic lights on a distant hill.
The FAA regulations require you to know the location, attitude, altitude, and direction of flight of the drone at all times.
If you just see a vague blinking dot and you have to look down at your screen to figure out which way it's moving, you do not have visual line of sight. You have wishful thinking.
This brings up a common defense I hear from pilots. They say, well, I just bring a visual observer, a VO. If I have a second person watching, it makes it completely safe and legal.
A visual observer is a helpful tool, but they are not magic.
The operational manuals stress that if you do not have strict, rehearsed, trained communication protocols, a VO does not solve the biological problem.
If the background lighting is confusing and your depth perception is failing because of the rods in your eyes, adding an untrained friend to stand next to you just means you have two confused people staring at the sky.
A VO is only a safety asset if you have pre-planned the route, defined the operational volume, and maintained a constant sterile loop of communication regarding the drone's telemetry.
So if our eyes are biologically failing us, the physics of the camera are working against us, the emotional high of the night sky is trying to trick our brains into accepting bad footage, and the aviation laws demand perfect spatial awareness.
It's a miracle anyone flies at night.
How on earth are commercial pilots actually getting these sweeping night shots without crashing?
They survive, and they produce stunning work because they do not wing it. They use a very specific operational playbook.
Let's break down that playbook. What exactly do master-level pilots do differently to survive the night-flying triangle and navigate the legal maze?
The first major tactic is that they simplify their geometry. We touched on this earlier, but it is a fundamental law of night operations.
Amateurs try to fly at night the exact same way they fly during the day. Complex orbits, fast reveals, weaving through obstacles, pitching the gimbal while yawing.
Professionals know that low light punishes complexity.
So they fly slower, and they use simpler, wider shots.
And the manuals make it clear, this isn't because they are boring or scared of crashing. It is a calculated exposure strategy.
Slower movements give the camera's autofocus processor time to lock on and maintain tracking in a low-contrast environment.
It allows the pilot to use a slightly slower shutter speed to gather more photons without introducing motion smear.
A simple, straight reveal or a gentle push-in gives the sensor a stable canvas to resolve the shadows and manage the chroma noise.
By simplifying the flight path, you are actively reducing the number of variables the camera's brain has to process at once. You are protecting the structural integrity of the image.
The next tool in the professional playbook is the day sight survey.
This is highly recommended by Transport Canada, and when you think about the physiological limits we just discussed, it makes perfect sense.
A day sight survey is arguably your single best defense against the dark.
You simply cannot spot certain hazards at night, no matter how good your drone's headlights are.
Think about unlit power lines crossing a street. Think about the thin, invisible guy wires stabilizing a cell tower.
Think about the exact height of the tree crowns near your launch point, or subtle terrain breaks where the ground suddenly drops off.
At night, all of those hazards just become invisible black voids.
Right. If your first time seeing location is when you show up to fly it in the pitch dark, you are taking an unacceptable, unprofessional risk.
Professionals walk the site, map the physical hazards, note where the confusing background lights will be, and plan their exact flight lanes and emergency recovery zones while the sun is shining.
It's like studying for an exam with the lights on instead of trying to read the textbook in the dark.
And speaking of the operational environment, the manuals emphasize maintaining a sterile control environment.
This goes right back to the biological limitations. At night, your primary sense, your vision, is severely compromised. Therefore, your other senses have to compensate.
Transport Canada points out that at night, sound might be your very first and sometimes your only warning of an approaching hazard, like a low-flying police helicopter or a small general aviation aircraft.
If you are standing around joking with the client, or listening to music, or just dealing with unnecessary chatter from a bystander, you're blinding your ears.
A sterile control environment means absolutely no non-essential talking during the flight. It ensures you can actually hear the airspace before you can see it.
Okay, let's talk about the ultimate professional tool mentioned in the playbooks.
The judgment ladder.
The judgment ladder. This is a set of specific thresholds for knowing exactly when to pack up your gear and stay grounded.
What are the specific red flags that tell a professional it's over?
The manuals outline 5 critical thresholds where a professional will pull the plug on a night shoot.
Okay, what's the first one?
First is the trust threshold. You land the drone when you no longer trust what the image on your screen is telling you.
If the shadows are so muddy you can't tell if a structural detail on a roof is missing, or if it's just crushed by chroma noise, the image is useless.
Second is the focus threshold. If you are relying on autofocus and it keeps hunting, or you cannot confidently verify sharpness even when you manually zoom in on the monitor, you stop. Plausible focus is not provable focus.
Right. If you think it looks mostly sharp, you fail the focus threshold.
Exactly. Third is the motion threshold.
If the ambient light is so low that the only way to get a bright enough image is to drag the shutter speed down so far that every slight movement of the drone turns into a smeared blur, the physics have defeated you. You ground the drone.
Fourth is the edit threshold. This is the absolute cure for the we'll fix it in post mentality.
The imagined bucket.
Yes. The edit threshold means you land when you know the raw footage won't survive post-production.
If the white balance is drifting wildly between LED blues and sodium oranges, and you know that trying to rescue the color in your software will tear the digital file apart and create massive banding, you stop.
You do not capture garbage and hope a computer can perform a miracle later.
And finally, the repeatability threshold.
If the wind or the lighting conditions are so marginal that you cannot fly the exact same clean, sharp movement twice in a row, the environment is too unstable for dependable commercial work.
But what really stands out in the manuals isn't just the thresholds themselves. The real flex, the ultimate professional flex, is when they make the decision to use them.
This is the separator between an amateur and a master. Amateurs try to figure out their limits while they are already in the air, dealing with the adrenaline, the client looking over their shoulder, and the rapidly changing light.
Professionals define their abort points before they even launch.
They say out loud during their pre-flight briefing, "If I cannot verify crisp focus on the first pass, I am landing."
Or, if the drone's strobe light starts blending into the city background and I lose orientation for even 2 seconds, I am landing.
By defining the red flags on the ground, in the like, they remove ego and emotion from the equation entirely.
It is such a stark contrast in behavior. The amateur chases the coolest, most complex shot in the darkest hour of the night, fighting the camera's physics, fighting the biological limits of their own eyes, and fighting the law.
They usually come home with noisy, blurry garbage.
The professional captures the essential, simple, perfectly exposed shot during the blue hour, that twilight period where the margin of light is still barely working in their favor.
And they literally pack up their gear and go home when the light stops supporting the mission. They do not force it.
They recognize that choosing to stay grounded is not a failure of skill. It is the ultimate expression of quality control, legal compliance, and risk management.
So what does this all mean for you?
Whether you are out there flying drones commercially, taking photography as a hobby, or just someone fascinated by how machines and human biology interpret the world around us, this deep dive reveals a fundamental truth.
Operating at night is an intense, unforgiving intersection of photon physics, psychological discipline, and strict aviation law.
Darkness is not a canvas. It is a constraint.
It strips away vital physical information, making the camera uncertain and prone to generating noise.
It dilates our pupils and plays on our emotions, making the pilot artificially overconfident through the glowing lie of a tiny screen.
And the law demands absolute clarity and spatial awareness in an environment mathematically designed to confuse your depth perception.
The ultimate lesson from these engineering documents and operational playbooks is that bright does not equal truthful, and pleasing does not equal reliable.
You have to protect the structural integrity of the image and the physical safety of the airspace above your own emotional desire to get a cool cinematic shot.
If we take that a step further and connect this to the bigger picture, I want to leave you with a broader concept to ponder.
Think about how the cinematic trap we discussed today applies to the rest of the information we consume in our daily lives.
That is a fascinating leap. How so?
We talked extensively about how low light gives footage a free emotional upgrade, tricking the pilot into ignoring the weak, noisy, unreliable data underneath the mood.
How often do we do that with the media we consume?
How often do we accept data, news stories, or arguments simply because they are presented with dramatic emotional flair, a sleek production, a moody soundtrack, a charismatic, high-energy delivery?
We get caught up in the vibe and the cinematic presentation, and we completely fail to notice that the underlying signal, the actual evidence, the truth of the matter, is weak, blurry, and mostly just noise.
Wow.
We let the production value mask the lack of truth. We fall for the emotional fraud of the presentation.
That is an incredibly powerful takeaway.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
The next time you are out under the city lights, mesmerized by the glowing skyline, We hope you take a moment to look a little closer at the shadows and remember that the night is always hiding something.
Until next time. That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.